Well, here's an interesting new archaeological find in Egypt, found up near Saqarra. And it's, at first I thought when this came out, this must be the excavation that I recently talked about a few weeks back that they had just found. And of course, from this original picture here, it kind of looks like the way that came in. But hold on, this is like old brickwork that's done into it and stuff, and these tombs look a lot like the mastaba tombs and things like that that are found in the earliest of dynasties, whereas that one was a new find in the Valley of the Queens, and it showed up with its earliest excavations into it and findings that it was connected probably to the famed 18th dynasty, which King Tut's hooked up to and stuff, and 19th Ramses and so on else. But this appears to go back much earlier, and that's a fantastic find because that's something that I mentioned during that video here. But we'll take a look at this. There's a few pictures and a little bit of video of Zahi Hawass talking about it here, but they've unveiled, as they say, the discovery of 4 ancient Egyptian tombs. And it seems like they only really are talking about 2 of them at this point. I don't know why, really, but whenever these tombs come in, they cut off to the left and right and have their things into them. So it being of this quality here, and you can see it's shaped well and everything, and the walls have been plastered, which is pretty neat too. But at the time of this, it had to be somebody that was extremely hooked up to nobility or royalty or an actual king. And if you go back far enough, it really is just the king and his immediate family that gets this type of treatment. And the 4th dynasty we know about has that expounded to another level. And we've talked about that in other videos. But let's just take a quick peep here at what they're showing whenever they show this, because it has a few different depictions here, and they're only showing part of it that's been excavated and a little paintbrush taken to it and brushed off slightly here, and looking at it, and they're not acting like it's been deciphered totally yet and things off of it, but they also have already gone over it enough to where somebody knows well enough to just look this over, and within a couple of minutes they know exactly what's being said and so on, and who these are hooked up to, which is pretty interesting. On the left there, you can see that most plaster has been taken off the wall, but where it is, the picture and the colors are still pretty much there. There's a lot of that ancient blue that I talked about that was lost, that stayed blue, because later they started making it out of copper, and it would be blue when they put it on and closed the tomb, and everybody agreed with it and thought it looked great. But over the years, of course, like copper does, it oxidizes and turns green. That's why there's these weird depictions of things that aren't green and so on, we talked about. But over there on the left, you can actually see there's one of those Anubis beds that somebody's sleeping on at the time, and of course this would have something to do with funerary rites and everything. And this is back in the 5th dynasty, it appears, in time, so it's really not exactly all of the things that we think of that they're having with their funerary rites. In fact, it's amazing that these people have all of these things hooked up to them. If you'll look, there's the guy there in the top of the picture there has a tabletop stanza, and he's got something that appears to have 7 bars standing up from that, and that has to do with astrotheology. Let's not go off into left field with this, though. I just want to show you this actual original finding, where they also find a huge limestone sarcophagus. So at this time, this denotes that this person is hooked up to nobility. For all they know, when they first found it, it may be a king or somebody directly related, prince. All this type of stuff goes through the mind. And then once they're able to read these marks here, it tells you who this person was and what he was hooked up with and what he did for a living and things like that. It would denote him, so he was known in the afterlife. And back then too, they had things that were a little bit more realistic, although everybody's fit and trim, and that's not necessarily how it was with everybody either back at this time. So it's a little bit of photoshopping, and then later, of course, gets changed into that. At this point here in time, I believe they only have 5 different colors and the ability to blend white with a couple of them and light and dark, and we'll talk about that here in a minute as it shows up. But Zahi Hawass released this here just the other day, and beside it they find very important objects, all of them related to the Old Kingdom, he says, which is pretty interesting because it's not stuff that's we're used to seeing, where a lot of it that we've been seeing is stuff from New Kingdom all the way out in Ptolemaic type ages and so on. And I talked about in my recent video how it's really good to find something of age here, and ironically, boom, here we get this to pop up. So they have these 4 tombs here, and pottery vessels, alabaster pots, other objects that are shown here, and a lot of them have been broken over time, and this guy is trying to put them back together. And it's kind of odd, he's got a like Dallas Stars jacket on and a Fila cap, but whatever. And I guess, you know, not everybody that does archaeology dresses like Indiana Jones, of course. But here they're showing some of the artifacts that are coming out of this one tomb, and where they're curating it and getting all together before they have to pack these things extremely careful and then try to take them all the way out of there so they don't just get shattered on the way. It wouldn't take much with a lot of these guys, and of course if you glue them all back together, it's kind of better to do most of it in the field right here and get it all back in and then try to take them than to do it more. But this sarcophagus was sealed 4,300 years ago or so, so that's pretty amazing. Inside the sarcophagus, though, was a gold-covered mummy, one of the oldest and most complete ever found. So that's pretty impressive because you don't usually find a gold-covered mummy. And we did show some that were from back in the Middle Dynasty, where they had done these brad works and ended up doing wrappings by them and so on. And a few pharaohs were done out of silver and so on. And recently, probably a year and a half ago now, showed one that was shown to have a golden tongue, like indicating who he was and that he could actually speak to the gods and so on. But that's pretty interesting here. And so they really only talk about 2 of them here, and you can see the site here where they've got it set up, and tents and so on for it to do so. But all these pits over here to your left have something to do with it also. And it looks like, to me, like quite often what you find is there was a famous person buried right near here, and other people started a burial ground or necropolis right near this point. It seems that way pretty much all the way through it, even other times later whenever they start to put other people in other necropolises and so on, those also seem to have stemmed from a starting that was done that way, and where somebody extremely important had actually just picked out a spot that was separate. That eventually became a graveyard like we think of it today, but in their vernacular it's a necropolis. But a gold-covered mummy, so they won't show a picture of that, and that's kind of disappointing there. Hopefully I'll get a picture of it here soon, and I don't want to end up making 8 videos off of this, just like the other one that I showed recently where they found one in the Valley of the Queens, and I showed a preemptive but not the stuff that goes with it. But I was like, here's something's coming up. Well, here's another one that's showing it. They're giving you a few pictures and so on too, so it's pretty neat. And this is, you know, in Saqarra here, so it's a little south of Cairo. And what's unique is that one of them has been called, and strangely, whenever they speak it out, and it got put in the paper here in AFP, or AFP, they didn't actually tell you which one it was that was named it, but his name is the King's Secret Keeper, which is cool. Now, I guess we can figure it out from there, but because there's another one that said that he's actually the head or the assistant to the advisor to the pharaoh himself. So at the fifth dynasty, whenever everything was kicking and stuff, this is pretty important here and everything. But right about the end of the fifth dynasty, towards the sixth, we start to have the very first intermediate period, and certain things never come back to the way they were. I might take a look and show you some people that were around there and other artifacts that are found around that time to clarify what we're going to see here. But with the perfect wrapping and the gold around it, I'm not sure that they're going to be real willing to unwrap him to any point or anything like that. We'll have to see what they're facing here off of it. But so there's one of the earliest pyramids ever were. It's a step pyramid, but it's not too far away from there, and so pretty exciting. And the first tomb that they found belongs to someone named Mary, and this is actually a man's name, not necessarily a woman's name, and it actually kind of like a term later that's used for meaning beloved and so on, and is even thrown in front of Isis's name in a few places that have been found where it says Mary Isis. So it's kind of an epitaph type of thing, and you can see that even though it's kind of flecked off the wall from here, at this time they were already making extremely squared off, perfect things, especially for these type of people, so they were going out of their way to make it perfect. And the walls were still imperfect with pitting and so on, just due to the way that they are. So they would end up taking a plaster, which is much like concrete or something like we use, which we call mud, but it's gypsum and stuff on the walls. We texture it some, but they were trying to make it extremely smooth, and in this way they were making perfect blocks. You can see they have a white color here, they have a red ochre, they show males in, the females are shown very pale, and this was done all over the Mediterranean at the time, and you can see it in all types of people's art, from the Etruscans and the Minoans, and even in Sumerian, Persia, the Mitanni, and Greek period of the time, and later through it, just through the whole period here. But the depiction that's being shown on the right hand side to middle a little bit is showing him in red ochre. The workers are a little lighter. We'll take a closer look at this here in a second. I think it shows it more close head on. But the women are drawn pale, and the men are doing the work and so on, and so they get tan and the women stay pale and so on. And this is artwork and types that are taken from before this period and all the way through. So nothing really unique about it, but what's kind of unique is, again, I see some of that blue and blue around his neck and so on there, but he appears to be done in red ochre, and the workers that are down below him appear to be done in more of a pinkish type color. And it's odd that over this time there's still that much variant and difference. And of course, if you use straight red ochre, it oxides and turns a little bit darker. But this is one color that they're used, and you can see it over here on the left, along with some very strong blue colors that have held and retained their color. And they still show in some ways, although pieces have flicked off of the paint on the wall, the artwork pretty much in the color that it was and everything like that. I think it's amazing we have artwork from this long ago and it still pretty much exists. Can you imagine somebody taking a cinder block wall, putting some plaster like we have on our walls and so on, in some way, even though it's locked inside of a tomb, of somehow being able to make it 3,500 years or so? It's pretty amazing. This guy, Mary, he was the assistant of the great leader of the palace and priest of the god Ptah, Saqarra. So Ptah is somebody that's more Memphite, I guess, or whatever, down in Cairo, and he's a creator type god, and something very strong during this time, definitely. And of course there was a mending of the north and the south and these people and stuff, but he was the assistant of the great leader of the palace. So the assistant to the vizier or advisor to the pharaoh, and at the same time a priest of the god Saqarra. So no wonder he ended up with this real nice tomb, I guess, here. But at different times people didn't get that much, and at other times they got a little bit more. It's amazing when we find tombs that actually weren't ransacked in long time ago. In fact, a lot of times not too long after it was put together as a tomb, if they thought there was things of money inside there. And then we've had more of that happen also in a later date. But things like this show some uh, pretty neat uh, findings, and this was apparently untouched through all of this, and that's fantastic. That's the type of thing we want to see, is something that isn't being picked through, and we have to wonder what people were getting versus this is the way it was actually done. And it shows daily life scenes and so on. It doesn't actually show the whole set of the Book of the Dead necessarily, or they don't mention it here off of it. But the second tomb was from a guy named Khnum Jedef. So like Jedefre and the god Khnum, which is the ram-headed god or whatever, the priest of the pyramid complex of Unas. And he's a pharaoh that's from the end of the 5th dynasty. And we'll look at that here in a moment here. But the second tomb for this guy Khnum Jedef is the priest of the late 5th dynasty, and he's Unas was the last king of the 5th dynasty, and there's a lot of depictions we've seen that this looks familiar to, where you can still see some red ochre on the male there and the pale female here, and they're wearing like mop headdresses. At the time, the cattle were giving them lice, all kinds of things, and so it was a thing for the people to all have wigs. You know, when I was a kid, I was wondering why in the Elizabethan days the men all had these wigs and they powdered them and did all these funny things about it, but it has to do from ancient rites from way back when. And of course, the more you got Pompu, the more you got like that. You can see between them too, there's this very little man that's right there, and he's got a side knot on, so they apparently had a boy, and that's the way they kind of depict him whenever they do so. So around it also has hieroglyphics, and some of those even look like the earliest type. It doesn't even really have the full form on those. So might be neat whenever they give us, if they can here shortly, the full names of people like this. So this is again a find that's just come out here, and the recent find took place in the Saqarra necropolis. This is south of Cairo, of course. And here again, we can see different people, like the lady on the very far left has that mullet mop head, and you can see that's also going on the guy in the far right there, and the wife in the middle part of it. But then the other people have the other type of headdresses, and like the child on the right hand side has a side lock on too, denoting, you know, that's a male, but you keep that side lock going until you get to a maturity, and then things happen from there. But you can also see that there are little ones next to the middle statue and even behind the statue on the right, but I believe that's going to end up being his wife, which they didn't always show as prominent and is standing next to. And you can see something like this. They all are making that first step forward, and it's always reminded whenever I see these statues of like a wedding, whenever after everything happens and they kiss and you're the bride and the thing like that, they tell you, well, this is Mr. and Mrs. so-and-so, and they da-da-da, and they walk down the aisle. You know, that's the way it used to do it. Anyhow, it seems to have something to do with that. But this is something for the afterlife, so it's probably more of a hooking up to that than we actually have, you know, realization of, because they're all buried together and so on, like we have burial plots that are near each other. But Egypt has unveiled several major archaeological sites and finds in recent years, which is pretty cool. And they seem to be trying to get everything back to it. Here's some other statues that are shown here. The country is hoping to revive its tourism industry after years of political unrest, which was the first problem, and then of course COVID and so on. And it's pretty much wide back open now. You look around, you won't see anybody except for silly people wearing masks. But with finds like this, that should make the industry kick up a little more. People wanting to go there. I've been wanting to go there here recently and back. So who knows? Anyhow, so These finds that they're showing here, of course, are just preliminary type things, and they ended up in the tent over here to show these people who wanted to come and see it examples of what's coming out of there. This is not the everything, and of course we didn't get to see the sarcophagus or the mummy that's gold wrapped or anything like that yet, so hate to say it, but there's going to be another vid to come out on this, hopefully fairly soon. I'll believe sometime during the summer they're going to come out with something else, and then later they'll probably come out with something a little bit more on it and a little more in depth. And one can only hope that if the bodies are good enough to do so, that they'll go ahead and try to do a DNA test on them and things like that, to where we can get that already squared away, and they might be able to make connections off of that. And if they really just try to get that done in a whole way, we might show that there's a lot more connections, just like we've seen in the recent papers of Saqarra and the necropolises and so on, that they have done this. Let me know what you think down below. Pretty exciting find here. I can't wait to find more. It's almost like a teaser, or it's a trailer for a movie coming up, or golden mummies, the secret keeper and his tomb, the Pharaoh's secret keeper. The keeper of the Pharaoh's secrets. What's up with that?